welcome to Thumb Wind's End of the Road in Michigan podcast. Each week, we select one of our amazing stories about the Great Lakes region and the tip of Michigan's thumb. These are taken from thumbwind.com and presented here so that you can listen to it anytime, anywhere. Today's we have two tales from the Upper Thumb of Michigan. The first is about the sacred site for Native Americans in the Upper Thumb of Michigan. Prior to European settlement, the Thumb region was considered a rich hunting and gathering area for the Anishinaabe, and the area was highly fought over. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's tale from the end of the road. Part 1, The White Rock, the sacred cornerstone of Michigan's thumb. To the indigenous peoples of Michigan, the Anishinaabe views the White Rock as a sacred site. The rock is located on the edge of the Lake Huron shore just north of Forestville on M25. The rock was much, much larger than it appears today. Which today in 2020 is mostly underwater due to the high water levels of the Great Lakes. The Indians ensured that fresh game and food items were placed on the site as an offering. Gitche Manitou or Great Spirit would recognize the offering by the Anishinaabe as a token of thanks for the bounty and richness of the peninsula. Part 2, Henry Schoolcraft, in his survey of the Upper Great Lakes with Lewis Cass in 1820, documented the White Rock and its prominence. In Schoolcraft's field notes, he wrote, "White Rock, an enormous detached mass of transition limestone standing in the lake at the distance of half a mile from the shore. This is an object looked upon as a kind of milestone by the voyageurs and is known to all canoe and boat travelers of the region. The White Rock is an object which had attracted the early notice of the Indians who are the first to observe the nonconformities in the appearances of the country, and it continues to be one of the places at which offerings are made." White Rock was so well known as a landmark that it was utilized as a legal treaty boundary marker. It defined the territory ceded by Ottawa, Chippewa, Wyandot, and Potawatomi with the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. The land was denoted by a line from White Rock, southwest to a point roughly east of St. John's then South Fort Defiance on the Maumee River in Ohio. Part 3, Pioneer Settling of White Rock City. Edward Petty was the first white settler in Huron County. He opened a trading post within sight of White Rock and later moved to the growing village. By the 1830s, White Rock City was a fishing and lumbering port and commerce hub. The city grew enough to warrant a post office in 1859, which operated until 1907. On a city directory published by Beers in 1875, White Rock had the following businesses listed: 2 building and carpentry firms, 2 fishing companies, 2 hotels, 2 dry goods stores, 1 lumber mill, a wagon and carriage manufacturing and blacksmith shop, 1 salt block operation, 1 physician, 1 stave factory, and finally 1 cooper shop. In 1871, the entire community was destroyed in the Great Fire. The fire turned out to be a fatal blow for the town. As a result, it was never rebuilt to the size it once was. Part 4, The Famous Lighting Strikes of White Rock. Local lore tells a story from around 1860 that a group of settlers decided to have a square dance on White Rock. Local Indians warned them not to have this dance, as the White Rock was sacred. Disregarding the warnings, 2 sets of square dancers piled onto the White Rock from canoes. One man decided to heed the Indians' warning and remained floating in the water nearby. Suddenly, as they danced, a bolt of lightning struck the White Rock. It killed all the dancers, leaving only the floating witness to tell of the terrible tragedy. It should be noted that while this story has been repeated, researchers have yet to find an official record of such an event actually taking place. Today White Rock is almost awash by the high levels of Lake Huron. The size has shrunk too. With erosion and lighting strikes, the rock is about 12 feet across. The landmark was used as a training target for bombing practice during World War II. Thus, it's no wonder that the famous rock is a smaller shadow from what it was 100 years ago. The sources for this little story are taken from Detroit, in the Territory of Michigan Articles of a Treaty. A map of the Acting Superintendency of Michigan, 1837, MSU Map Collection. And finally, The Odd History of White Rock, Michigan. We will continue with our second short story after this message. Our second story switches to the early industry in Michigan's Upper Thumb. Just about every community along the shoreline was producing salt. Salt was used primarily for curing and storage of dried meat and fish. Michigan produced a great deal of refined, food-quality salt that was sold all over the U.S. during the lumbering era. Part 1. The Upper Thumb led in Michigan's production of salt. The first successful attempt to manufacture salt in Michigan was made by the East Saginaw Salt Manufacturing Company in 1859. The success of this company led to the rapid development of the industry in the Saginaw Valley, where the salt blocks, which evaporated the salt brine, were operated in close company with sawmills. Part 2. Salt well operations in the 1800s. The salt industry soon spread to Midland and St. Louis and the lumbering towns on the shores of Lake Huron. Towns such as Caseville, Port Crescent, Port Austin, New River, Port Hope, Harbor Beach, and White Rock on the south side of Saginaw Bay, and Tawas City, East Tawas, Osable, and Oscoda to the north all started salt operations. A salt well was sunk in Bayport but never had any production. By 1888 there were 127 companies listed in Michigan producing 5.2 million barrels of salt annually. Michigan produced almost half of the nation's salt between 1870 and 1880. Part 3. Salt production in Huron County. The availability of salt deposits in the Thumb has been evident since ancient times. The Sand Ridge Indian Trail, which started near Saginaw and snaked its way around the Thumb to Harbor Beach, was known as a path in which to access rich hunting and fishing areas of the area. It also provided access to 3 salt licks that attracted the game. The first salt well in Huron County was sunk by Ayers & Co. at Port Austin in 1863. Later a salt block was erected, and the industry gradually spread to Caseville, Port Crescent, Grindstone City, New River and Port Hope in 1874, Harbor Beach, then known as Sand Beach, in 1876, and finally White Rock in 1872. A 2,000-foot deep well and the evaporating block was also erected at Old Bay Port but was never in operation. The brine wells extracted the salt-laden brine from the Berea sandstone, which occurs at depths varying from 495 feet at White Rock to 1,770 feet at Caseville. Part 4. The salt industry declines in the Thumb. That the salt industry was very largely dependent upon lumbering taking place in the Thumb. The salt block operations depended on the sawdust, bark, and trimmings from the sawmills for fuel. Wood fuel for steam and pan evaporation lasted until the forests were gone. As a result, when lumbering ceased major operations in the Thumb, it became too costly to use alternative fuels such as coal. All salt production operations from the 14 companies ceased in Huron County in 1896. By the early 1900s, all the lakeshore plants had disappeared. Towns such as Port Crescent and New River no longer existed. Most of Port Crescent's buildings were between Port Austin and Kindy. The sources for today's story on salt production are the brine and salt deposits of Michigan, their origin, distribution and exploitation by Cook, Charles Wilford, published in 1882. Publication 8. Geological Series 6. Mineral Resources of Michigan with statistical tables of production and value of mineral products for 1910 and prior years. And finally, C.M. Davis's Readings in the Geography of Michigan. Published in 1964. This concludes this week's story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Thumb Wind's End of the Road podcast. If you like this kind of tale, you are invited to subscribe to our podcast. Just search for The End of the Road in Michigan from wherever you're listening from. Please watch for and download next week's podcast and take a moment to give us a review. Have a great day.